Good evening, punters, and welcome to another episode of The Tripod, where we break down every NRL game every week from a betting perspective. If you've only just joined us and found us this week, you've chosen a good time with 14-2 on Best Bets last week, which is our best week of the season on Best Bets, and looking to continue that into round 10, which is an interesting round. A lot of big double-digit favourites this round. Jacob, how are you going?
I'm excellent, thanks, mate. That's right. 14-2 was our best round of the season, eclipsing 13-2, which we went, I think, in round 6. And can you believe we're about to handicap round 10, which is the midway mark of this slightly shortened season, which we've had in a couple of segments. But even though we're halfway through the season almost, we're at 63% winning
Crazy.
Best Bets, which is unprecedented in 2020 to win at that kind of clip with how educated the marketplace is. You know, people that we've shared our knowledge with for 5 years plus, they know what to look for too to find good winning bets against the spread with lines and totals. And yet we're still handing out winners after winners every single week.
It definitely gets tougher every year, and to be honest, it was so easy to find winners 5 years ago. Not so easy now, but like you said, 63% is really, really good. And I'd say unsustainable, but we've been able to sustain it for 10 weeks of the season, so hopefully we can keep it going.
We definitely do our best
for the back half of the season. Let's start off the round with Thursday night in the grand final preview. Oh, sorry, not the grand final preview, the grand final rematch of the Roosters against the Raiders. The Roosters are 11.5 point favourites, the total sitting at 38.5 points. Now, this is crazy. I mean, I don't know what this line would have been at the start of the season, but I'll tell you right now, it definitely would not have been Roosters minus 11.5. But the Roosters have been an absolute juggernaut this year. You get back Brett Morris and you get back arrested Cordner for this one. Ikavali keeps his spot after that ridiculous game last week. Now, the Raiders are in an absolute shambles, I guess. You know, you lose Hodgson for the season. They've already had a pretty rough season so far. You lose Simonson, but you can slot Rapana in, so that's kind of a wash there. But now the news about an hour ago that you're losing Curtis Scott with an infection in his arm. So the injury toll is adding up for this Raiders team. But at the same time, the line's 11.5, and the Roosters had a gutsy win last week. They also have the extra rest time off the Thursday game as opposed to the Raiders. But, you know, I'm not laying 11.5 with a Roosters team. It's firstly, the line's too high. Secondly, they've had to travel to Brisbane and then to Townsville last week. And it's added incentive for the Raiders. They got, you know, some would say robbed in last year's grand final. So they've got some motivation for this one. They've got injured player theory with Hodgson out. But at the same time, I don't know if I want to take plus 11.5 with this Raiders team against a Roosters team that is an absolute juggernaut.
Honestly, for the Raiders, if they think back, and I said this on the recap pod, it was 8-all with 10 minutes to go in the 2019 grand final. It was there to be won, and you can pin it all on one call, but regardless, it was a close game. They made mistakes in as well. That was such a chance to win, to hoist the premiership trophy, and now this year, it's just not going to happen. That Hodgson blow is probably the most brutal loss of any player so far in 2020, because you're talking about the most important player to a certain team for the season. I know Radley is a huge loss for the Roosters, but they can cover him more than the Raiders can cover Hodgson. Guys like Munster and Moses have got the injuries, but they're going to be back. So this one is really tough. And the Raiders have been written off by a lot of the general media, and they've even been written off by us. I mean, I wrote on Monday, they're not going to be back. They're not going to be in the grand final this year. It's sad to say. But maybe that gives them a ton of motivation, as if they need it anymore in a revenge spot. Ricky can say, you know, nobody believes in you boys. And while they've got a lot of injuries, you mentioned Horsburgh, Gula, Soliola, they were still waiting on Bateman. The forward pack is still fairly strong. I was impressed by the fight they put up against the Storm. They've had Louis and Sutton that are very, very capable reserves. They've had Hudson Young back from suspension. Joe Tapine was out injured for quite a few games this year. He's playing. So it's still a pack that can compete. I really don't want to fade them this week. Look at the Roosters. Obviously, Cordner back from his rest is a big inclusion, as is Brett Morris, assuming he's sweet to go. And if Jake Friend passes HIA, it's their third straight Thursday game, so some continuity there. It's their strongest team they can pick, really, of all the players who don't have season-ending injuries. Tupou's the only guy you'd argue is going to be in there, and I think they'll be okay, considering a bloke who scored 5 tries last week takes his spot. Now, everyone assuming that the current top 4 will probably be the top four at the end of round 20. But like the Knights and the Rabbits are both only one win out. And on top of that, as much as the Roosters want to be top four, they don't want to have to go to Melbourne first week of the final. So my point is, when they pick the strongest team they can, they expect nothing less than to go out and win. And I think they really will. So I don't strongly see a good value on either side of the line in this one.
Indeed, and that's why we have no best bets on the Thursday night game. But moving on to the early Friday game, we've got the Storm up against the Titans. The Storm are 19.5-point favourites. That's the biggest line of the season so far, with the total sitting at 45.5 points. Now, if you know us, we find it very, very hard to lay, double digits,
women.
Let alone, women as well. But very, very hard to lay double digits, let alone close to 20 points, over 3 converted tries. So, but in this one, there's just no way that I can actually see the Titans beating the Storm. And we always kind of say that if you want to take the dog, no matter what the line, you have to have some sort of belief that they can actually win the game. And to be honest with you, Munster named for this one for the Storm, which I find interesting because, if they were going to name Munster against a Titans team that they'd probably beat anyway, I think he has to be 100% or very, very close to. Otherwise, you just rest him for another week in a game that you pretty much know you're going to win. Now, you lose Jesse Bromwich for this one, but you get back Kaufusi, who was missing from last one. In terms of the Titans, I mean, they've been bad this year, but you get a little bit of a boost. You get some outside backs back. You get Brian Kelly back and Philip Sammy so that Thompson can stay there at fullback, which is his best position, in my opinion. But it's a tough one for me. I think the over is the play here. 45.5 points. It is the highest total of the round, but I can see the Storm putting on a lot of points against this Titans team that has shown some weaknesses in their defense.
I've been quite impressed by the Titans. If you look at the body of work, we're 9 rounds in. Yeah, and 9 rounds in, for them to have 3 wins is pretty impressive. We picked one of those wins, the upset in Brisbane. We didn't pick when they upset the Tigers or the Warriors, and in fact, both those wins absolutely screwed us. Happened to be the only losing legs of massive multis in those rounds. But there is just such a golfing class between these two sides. Even though the Titans are getting back Kelly and Sammy, like Hipgrave was really, really strong last week to play through a shoulder injury and supposedly is good to go playing with a busted shoulder. But you look at the Storm, that, as you say, Munster's back and Kaufusi as well now, and Jesse Bromwich out. Now, what does Jesse Bromwich and Cam Smith have in common? 2 pretty different players, but they can both be covered by Brandon Smith. I mean, how ridiculous is that Brandon Smith can come on and play hooker and be an 80-minute hooker if they needed, but he can also slot in the front row. I mean, what an animal the Hectic Cheese is. Now, after 2 extremely taxing wins for the Storm, you think about the overtime win against the Roosters and then back that up by a fierce battle in Canberra last week. They get to stay on the sunny coast. They get to play at home against the Gold Coast. Like, this will be a nice tonic. But I don't think they take this lightly. You look at the top 4 right now, the Storm has the worst plus-minus of all the top 4 teams. This is a kind of game that they expect to get a decent lead and they should go on with it. So while the line is too high, I do expect the Storm to run up a fair score in this one.
Indeed, and meant to be perfect weather out there at the sunny coast. We are taking one and one only bet on this game, and it is the Storm race to 30. You'll find that one. The best price is $1.83 on Bet Easy. Let's move on to the Friday night game. Interesting one here. The Tigers hosting the Broncos. The Tigers are 5.5-point favourites, and the total is 36.5. Now, a few changes for this Tigers team. Now, obviously, lost to the Rabbits last week, and we kind of thought that the Rabbits would be too good for them. And to be honest, they were. I mean, I know the Tigers got a couple of late tries. Maybe that game seemed a little bit closer on the scoreboard than it really was. But I'll tell you what, once they brought in, Benji Marshall to the team, you can just see the attack elevate. And that's going to happen this week. Josh Reynolds suspended for the kick to the head so that Benji Marshall and Billy Walters are going to be in the halves for this week. Luke Brooks dropped, which was a surprise to many. Now you get Tommy Talau back on the wing. I think he's a lot better than Reece Hoffman. And I think this helps the over, so I think I would certainly lean towards the over 36.5 in this one. Now, in terms of the Broncos, you lose Alex Glenn, but you get back Othman Gao, which is probably a wash for me. And look, I read something that Fifita was going to be back this week. He's not. He's going to be 2 to 3 more weeks before he comes back, which is a little bit of a blow for the Broncos. Now, I said that I'd like to take the Broncos losing streak theory once they finally break that duck, and that's what they did last week. But I'd probably want the 6.5 in this game in order to take the Broncos. But even so, at the 5.5, I think I'd still lean Broncos, especially now that they've had that players poll and the Broncos got voted the team that most teams would, I guess, most like enjoy to beat.
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit of fire in the belly for the Broncos there. I know it's a small thing, but I think that might fuel them a little bit in this game. So at the 5.5 line, lean Broncos.
Well, I think the Tigers are going to enjoy beating the Broncos in this one. Like, they're still missing Matt Lodge. Katoni Staggs was meant to be playing last week, then ended up not being brought into the side. He's not even in the 21 this week. You mentioned Fafita. So they're still thin. I mean, if Tavita Pangai Jr. is going to play the way he did last week, every week, then you've still got a decent forward pack. But I just don't know if that's certain. What I would say is obviously they've relieved a mountain of pressure on themselves by breaking that 6-game losing streak. But you beat the Bulldogs, who are at the moment, bottom of the ladder. And not only that, it was the Bulldogs, probably close to the Bulldogs' worst performance of 2020. So the Broncos are about to get snapped to reality if they think this game will be similar. Because what we know about the Tigers is they make you earn everything. Now, to drop Brooks to the bench, I find is quite drastic. But he did miss, I think it was 8 tackles last week. And that's Madge making a point that there's no sacred cows and that it's defense first mentality. I am still waiting for the Grant at 9, Brooks at 7, Walters at 6. I've been saying I want them to play Billy Walters because I think that's the future. So maybe we'll get that at some point in this game when Brooks comes off the bench. They've had back-to-back tough losses against Penrith and the Rabbits, and now they're expected to win. I think they do. I think they've got key advantages in important positions across the ground. We should also mention the Broncos because I talked about the forward pack, but there's a bit of whispers that Herbie Farnworth is carrying an injury. Tessie New didn't finish training. Coates was playing with a non-contact jersey. So they could have disruption in the back line as well as an understrength forward. That's why I wouldn't touch the Broncos. That's why I agreed to a side bet of you. I'll take the minus 5.5 with the Tigers.
And I'll take the plus 5.5 with the Broncos for $200. Lock it in. And that would be my first win since the restart. Jacob's absolutely obliterated me 4-0 on side bets. Let's move on to Saturday. It's the Dragons up against the Dogs. The Dragons are 9.5-point favourites and the total sitting at 37.5. I don't think we've seen the Dragons at 9.5-point favourites, and I don't know if they should be 9.5-point favourites in this one. I think the line is a little bit too high for me to consider taking this Dragons team, even though, now they've got some belief that they can actually make the 8. They smoked Manly Sunday night, but that's kind of one of the reasons I wouldn't like to play them. It's the last game that everyone saw. They won by a margin that probably they didn't deserve to win by, and Manly had an absolute shocker in that one. I think that, Daly Cherry Evans dropped like 4 passes that is just like normal for him to just catch them and make a play. So, but in saying that, there's something to be said with having a big win as an average team and having some confidence and some belief now that you can legitimately make the 8. Now, I don't want to lay the 9.5, but I also am iffy about taking the 9.5 with the Dogs. You have, maybe you get a new coach bump. It's not really a new coach bump, but it's a quick coach bump. Dean Pay quit last week, and, who knows what this Bulldogs team is going to serve up this week. I think that most of the players didn't mind him, so it's tough to sort of say their motivation for this game. But like I said, this is a talent-devoid Bulldogs team, even though I do like the changes that they've made. Lachlan Lewis back in the halves, Meany back to fullback. I don't mind that for this Dogs team. But even so, taking the 9.5, you still kind of think they have to score at least a couple of tries. And the way the Bulldogs have been playing this season, I don't know if I can count on that.
Yeah, that's right. Dean Pay, it reported that he quit, but he was told you're not going your services aren't going to be required after this year. And then once he knew that they were moving on from him, it's also about, it's really harsh, and I feel for him because he was given almost a no-win situation when he inherited this squad that was absolutely stuffed from a salary cap point of view. And talent devoid is a harsh way of putting it, but less talented and less match-winning players than, most other NRL clubs. And he's had good moments. He's had
arguably all.
He's closed out the last 2 seasons on good runs with his team playing footy, but 1 win from 9. What other coaches could have done much better, I'm not sure. But they've got this $3 million war chest. I think they want to know who's coming in next and bring that person in ASAP, and most likely it's Trent Barrett, so they can have a say in constructing the roster that they want to bring this team back to glory. It has been a minute since this team was formidable. And you're right, like George Arliss is the assistant coach So now he's the interim coach. Does that guarantee that the team will lift like teams often do with a new coach? I'm not sure, because it's not like, as I said, he's not a permanent. He's not going to be a permanent fixture there.
Right.
And they've still got a couple of key forwards out. The news that Harawira Naira might be able to join back into this team could help. But it's more about the Dragons for me. They got their mojo back. Like, they ran away with the Manly win. Now, like Brisbane, you wouldn't want to get carried away by a win like that. You mentioned that Manly were terrible. But, geez, they've got a favourable draw now, because you beat a depleted Manly. Now you play the Bulldogs. Next week is the Warriors. And then the week after that, Tigers. Like, that's a pretty decent month of footy if you want to keep improving each week and actually push towards the 8, which would have sounded crazy. Now, what else would have sounded crazy? After that round 4 matchup, if we remember, which everyone said was, losing coach heads to Centrelink, it was the Dogs that spanked the Dragons on that Monday game by 20. Yet Mary is here with a side that is 1 win outside the top 8. And Dean Pay is the one who's gone after 5 straight losses. So, boy, things can change quickly in this league. The Dogs have a full-strength pack. They genuinely have gun forwards that are in their prime that also want to perform to be considered for rep honours. You look at Paul Vaughan, Tarek Sims, Tyson Frizzell, maybe even McInnes. These guys have pride in their club and are playing good footy. I don't see that stopping. And while the Dogs, obviously, strength is their forward, if the Dragons win the battle, they probably do win this game by double digits. So the line is too high to lay, but I'm not taking it with the Dogs either.
Yep, so no best bets for the early Saturday game. Let's move on to the next one. It is the Rabbitohs up against the Knights. The Rabbitohs are 1.5 point favourites, and the total sitting at 37.5 points. Now, obviously, you lose Latrell for the Rabbitohs for this one due to suspension. You also lose Campbell Graham, who I think has been a decent outside back there for the Rabbits there at centre with a facial fracture. So you have a bit of a reshuffle, and then Alex Johnson moves to fullback, which, I've kind of said all year long should be where he's playing for this Rabbitohs team. But the Knights get a little bit stronger as well, and they bolster their bench. You get back Connor Watson, Mitch Barnett, and Matautia. Now, in terms of this matchup, now, we've said all along now, the Rabbitohs forward pack, it's obviously not as good as it was in previous seasons, but I really do think that this Knights forward pack is better than the Souths forward pack. I can argue that the Knights halves are just as good. And with the backline reshuffle with Souths, with Latrell out obviously, and Alex Johnson back to fullback, I can say that the Knights, outside backs are just as good, and you have Ponga there as well. So I think the Knights are the better team in this one. This is not really a true home ground for the Rabbitohs. I know that the Knights have kind of had, the one reason why you'd be hesitant to play the Knights, I guess, is that they've had 2 pretty brutal games in a row against Manly and the Eels. But I think there's a positive to take out of that, in that the Knights were not at their best last week against the Eels. I know that they lost by 6 points, but I don't think they necessarily deserved to lose by 6 points in that one. I think it was a pretty coin flip game, like we discussed last week. It was a Clint Gutho quick tap that was the difference in that one. So they didn't play their best, didn't deserve to lose by 6 points. I think that the Knights are the better team in this one. I think they will win this game as small underdogs.
Now, you mentioned most of the ins and outs, but it is also worth mentioning a couple other blokes. Liam Knight, who was scratched in the warm-up last week, and it's a serious ankle injury. It's going to be roughly a month. He's an underrated prop on a Rabbits team that, as you say, doesn't have the best forward pack. But did you also mention Daniel Saifidi is out for the Knights? So that's a loss too. I know they've got a clone of him in Jacob, who's the less accoladed brother, but he's improved this year, and they've certainly got a forward pack with getting the other blokes you mentioned back that's very capable of getting on top in this game, and they'll need to. You're right, they've had a couple of tough matches, but I think this team has high expectations, and you can look at it another way. The last 3 weeks, they've only got 1 win, which they scraped in Manly. They easily could have lost that. So I just think this team expects to play at a higher standard, and I just like the fact that we get the Rabbitohs, as you say, with no Knight, no Graham, no Latrell, reshuffle backline, 2 kind of green wingers. Your back 3 is an important, section of your team these days to help you get wins. I still think it's a quality spine with obviously Damien Cook playing off the new rules into Reynolds and Walker. So I don't know necessarily if the Knights have the better halves. It's probably worth mentioning that there's whispers that Mitchell Pearce is playing with a bit of a bum knee, which is a concern for sure, as is the Rabbitohs 8-day turnaround versus 6-day turnaround. Yeah, maybe you're right. Even though he's actually He's younger than me, but older than you. So
True.
we won't give away how old we are, but you can figure that out. But ultimately, I'm kind of with you that the Knights are not necessarily the worst side, and we're getting points.
Yep.
So let's take it.
Indeed, we will. We'll take the Knights as underdogs. We're taking the Knights plus 2 points for the game. You'll find that one at $1.91 on BetEasy. We're going to take the Knights plus half a point in the first half. You'll find that one on Ladbrokes and on Neds at $1.88. We're going to take the Knights plus 1.5 points in the second half. That is $1.80 on Unibet. Let's move on to the Saturday night game. It is the Sea Eagles up against the Eels. Manly is plus 10 points in this game at Brookvale. 37.5 points is the total. And look, another one of the games where if you said this was the line at the start of the season, there was no way I would believe you. But obviously Manly has been not decimated, but had injuries to very, very key players in their roster in this one. Now, I think I'd lean Manly with the double digits here. They could not have looked any worse against the Dragons last week. Like I mentioned when we talked about the Dragons game, there was just so many errors from this Manly side, especially from their key playmaker in Daly Cherry Evans. And like I've said in previous pods, I really do believe that errors are random. So I don't believe that will be the case this week, that they'll drop a shit ton of pill like they did last week. On the flip side, this Eels team, I said this, they won a coin flip against the Knights last week. Look, I wouldn't say they didn't deserve to win that one, but I think it was a true coin flip. Manly has a pretty strong home field advantage. But look, this Manly side, since they've lost Turbo, since they've lost Dylan Walker, they've really, really struggled to put on points. And it's not just one game now. It's not just a fluke. This is, I think we've had enough sample size now where we kind of know that this team is not the same, not nearly the same without those two guys in the team, especially Turbo. So although there's no way that I would lay double digits with the Eels away from home at Brookvale, which is historically the strongest home field from a betting perspective against the spread, Brookvale, I don't know if I can take this Manly side either, given how bad they've looked, and this Eels side may just be on a roll this season.
Well, they definitely are on a roll. And talking about the line being 10.5, it was 3.5 when they met, a month, 5 weeks ago, roughly. And
Yep.
of course, that you can't really forget that game. The Eels led 18-2 and then shouldn't have won. Mm-hmm. Turbo threw a pass to Garrick and he scored, and it was ruled forward and it wasn't. And of course they missed Turbo, and everyone's talking about that. And then of course you miss Adam Fanua-Blake. Like, what a brain snap. That's really hurt his team to not be there. Their best yardage forward. But you mentioned Walker, but not many people are kind of talking about the loss of Dylan Walker. But with him not there, they've just got no threat on the short side of the field. And so the defense kind of loads up on the open side of the field and dials in on Cherry Evans, and he can't do it all himself. And this Eels team is no joke. In fact, they're on a historical pace defensively. And I wanted to talk about the Eels defense. I wrote on Monday how they're the only team in the league conceding on an average of less than 2 tries per game.
Crazy.
And they've had multiple wins where they've held a team to 10 or less this season, which is really a trend of, a championship level team. But a trend I've noticed in our group, nobody's ever impressed by a low-scoring win. All I heard about that Knights 10-4 win was, how shit is this game? The Knights attack is so shit. Panthers, Parra didn't really deserve that win and stuff. It's like, but everyone's giving the Panthers so much credit for winning 56-24. They conceded 24 points, And all I can think is of a game in 2018 that I'll never forget. It was like mid-season 2018. The Roosters beat the Dogs 6-0 on a Thursday night. And all I heard in the group and the game thread was, the Roosters attack is so shit. The Roosters are useless. And I was going, hang on, they won an NRL game to 0. Like, you should be impressed by that. And they end up winning the next 2 competitions. I don't know if you noticed.
It's the same reason why people take overs more than unders,
Yeah, people get impressed by, scoring points more than keeping them out. But it's probably proven that keeping points out is even more impressive, because defense travels and defense is probably more sustainable, whereas attack, some days it clicks, some days passes stick and a ball bounces or tips a certain way off a kick, and others it doesn't. So in saying that, who knows whether it's really going to click for Eels? Manly's only real way to have any hope is to make it a grind type of game. We've said that they can't hang with teams if they do score points. And obviously the Eels are missing Moses, but he's the only one they're missing. Other than that, they're full strength. Gusso, Dylan Brown, even Jai Field, and Reed Marnie all chipping in and carrying that extra playmaking load. I don't want to get out in front of the Eels similar to the Panthers. So, again, we're passing the game.
And it's a funny one. You mentioned Mitch Moses, and we kind of always talk about value over replacement, and obviously Jai Field is slotted in there. But what a lot of people don't kind of take into consideration is that Gutho's taken a lot of that playmaking role over Moses, and he stepped it up to another level. Let's move on to the Sunday.
And the poster child is Cooper Cronk's out in the 2018 grand final. But you don't downgrade the Roosters for losing Cronk because Keary does more.
Right.
Same as what he's done in 2020. So that is definitely something you got to consider because everyone else is chipping in a little more for the Eels.
Exactly right. Let's move on to Sunday, and at the start of the earlier Sunday games, this one going to be at 2 p.m. I think the first 2 p.m. Sunday game we've had all season long. It is the Warriors hosting the Sharkies. The Warriors are plus 6 points. The total is 44.5 points, and obviously when I say hosting the Sharkies, still on the Central Coast Stadium, which is where they've been chilling for a while. Now, very, very tough game for the Warriors last week. They deserved to win. We were on the Warriors, like we kind of said, cost us 70 units of multis, and just a really rough loss to lose in the last 5 minutes like that off a bullshit, kick, flick back, try. So I do wonder about this Warriors side's I guess, mental state after that one. But I do think that they're going to be up for this one. The game is at home. And I think they're going to want to... I know they're going to want to send these blokes out that are going back to New Zealand. Mamalo's going back. Fasatua's going back. Ignatius Parsi's going back. And they're not actually going back next week. They're going back in a couple of weeks' time. So I think they're going to want to send those blokes off with at least one win over the next 2 games. And next week they play the Roosters. So this is the one that they should be up for. In terms of the Sharkies, now, we mentioned that they've been playing some good footy lately, and, last week, obviously, lose in a massive one, got put a 50 spot on them by the Panthers, but the Panthers, like we said, are genuine contenders. But when I do look back through those Sharks win, it was a close win over the Dogs. It was, a win over Manly that looked probably better at the time than it does now. They won by 18 points over that Manly side without Turbo, without Walker. But now we've kind of seen that Manly is certainly not the same team, that we thought they were a couple of weeks ago. And then they beat the Titans, who, obviously beat the Warriors last week, but we still know that the Titans are a bottom 4 team. So,
and let's go back. The only other game the Sharks have won this year was against the Cowboys, and that's not impressive either.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe, some of those games looked better at the time than they do now, that's for sure.
Yes, and they got brought back to earth well and truly by the rampant Panthers last week. And now they've lost Fafita to a hammy injury. They've dropped Williams. Is this the Sean Johnson revenge game against the Warriors because they didn't want him? Maybe his teammates lift for him. I've been quite impressed by the resilience of this Sharks team, lifting in games when you may not have thought they would. But the overall problem for this team is it's just been such a maligned season. So many things have gone against them. And while they've got a decent draw and they could still make a push for the 8, and they probably look at the Warriors as a side that they just have to be able to beat, they're just so limited this year. It's just not their year, honestly. And I think it's a very winnable game for the Warriors. And I don't think you bring back Nikorima and you bring back Eli Katoa into this Warriors team. This is now the strongest side that they've been able to put on the paddock in the whole of 2020. I don't think the Sharks are really any better than them. And I think that 9 times out of 10, any team that was up 12-0 against the Titans or even the Warriors, they should have won that game. You talk about it coming down to a deflected kick, but it should never have been anywhere near that close. They absolutely left that one slip. Self-inflicted part of it in the way that they played. They should have won that game by 30, just like the Sharks beat the Titans by 30, honestly. So I'm willing to believe, as you said, with some key players going home, the easy narrative after this game, if they lose, will be, the team is not unified and they're disheartened because players want to leave. But the easy narrative, if they win, is that they all got up for this one because this was the game they targeted, that they asked those players to stay until before they left. Although you mentioned that they've agreed to stay one more. But they ain't beating the Roosters. I think they are winning this one. I'm surprised we're getting plus 6.5, beyond a converted try, especially when the Warriors, I think a 3 from 4 at Gosford. So I'm willing to roll with New Zealand again.
Indeed we are, and we do have 3 best bets on the game for now. We are taking New Zealand plus 6.5 points. You'll find that one at $2 on Ladbrokes and on Neds. We've made a mechanical New Zealand team total over 18 points. It ends up being $1.84. Your main stake will go on Ladbrokes and on Neds over 17.5, and your partial stake will go on Sportsbet, like you can see there in the picture. And we also like the over 2 p.m. game on the Sunday. Fine weather. We are taking over 7.5 tries. You'll find that one at $1.88 on Ladbrokes and on Neds as well. Let's move on to the last game of the round. It is the Panthers hosting the Cowboys. The Panthers are minus 15.5 points. The total is 42.5. Panthers were awesome last week. And I mean, you know, you have Charlie Staines score 4 tries, and then, you know, he's going to be out for this week for breaching some COVID restrictions. But like I kind of said, and they're missing To'o as well. But I mean, you just slot Naden straight back in there at wing. And I said this Panthers team is just, you know, littered with outside backs. And, you know, to be honest, I wouldn't have Mansour in there. And I mean, once To'o's healthy, or if you could get Charlie Staines in there, I prefer that it wasn't Mansour that was the winger there for the Panthers. But they, you know, they're not going to skip a beat due to that. And I think, you know, it's a similar thing that we mentioned last week. They're just kind of like this Eels team where it's not like a superpower like the Roosters that everyone knows they're awesome, but this is just that there's a confidence around this Panthers side, and I think, you know, Cleary's gone to another level, and I kind of said you want to play on this Panthers side down the back stretch, because like Cleary's had, you know, I know it's a shortened season, but like Cleary's had 2 less games than all the other halves since the restart. He missed the first 2, and they've been switching out Mansour and Naden. They've had a few of those outside backs that have had rest, all that kind of stuff, and this Cowboys side, they would have had high hopes for this season, but now, you know, I don't know their mental state after, you know, getting rolled by the Roosters. I know you get a full 10 days rest, but, you know, they had chances in that game. They had chances the week before, and they couldn't convert them, and then they dropped their heads and got rolled. That's been 2 weeks in a row now for this Cowboys team, and now you lose Valentine Holmes, a key cog in your team for 2 months to 2.5 months, and possibly the rest of the season. Now you bring in Justin O'Neill on the wing. The guy can't catch a ball to fucking save his life. And we've said this, you know, with the new rules, you need to be able to score points. And now you don't have Valentine Holmes, a playmaker. Now you don't have Scott Drinkwater, a playmaker. So it's one of those games where I just cannot fucking see the Cowboys winning this. And maybe it's square taking Panthers, but I think they think of themselves as a team of destiny this year.
And people will say, well, Drinkwater can't catch the ball either, but he's actually one of the more promising players in this team. I just don't know what happened to him last week. But you're right, they just showed such mental fragility in capitulating to the Roosters. And the Roosters had all the reasons to be flat last Thursday, and yet they're the ones that won by 30 plus. This Panthers team is probably stronger than the Roosters 17 that the Cowboys faced in Townsville. And I don't know how much longer Green is there. I don't know how many more times he can get this group to respond. Like, go back in the last month of footy, right? That first half against the Tigers, they down 34-0. Second half against the Eels, they lost the half roughly 28-0.
Right.
Second half against the Roosters, how many tries? I lost count how many they let in that one, right? So in the last 4 games, you've had 3 of the most despicable halves of footy of any team all season by this side. So how can you trust them at all? And I really, the only way the Panthers won't win this game is if they just utterly disrespect the Cowboys. But they're just so confident. They're so well balanced. They're getting better every week. They're absolutely flying. And the other reason I don't mind actually jumping on a big favourite in this one is the new rules do trend towards scoring in flurries. You know, you get on a roll, you get the other team gassed, you get those repeat sets, and then the fatigue leads to like trying to hold down in the tackle a little longer. And we've seen that teams can go on runs of scoring when they get momentum behind them. And this Panthers team, we've seen how deadly they are when they get momentum. So it's rare, but we are going to be on favourite. I give ours next to no chance this one in Penrith.
And it is rare that we're laying the points, and we aren't necessarily in them for the but we are taking 2 best bets for now. We are going to take the Panthers to win both halves. You'll find that one at $1.95 on BetEasy. And we're going to take the Panthers minus 7.5 points in the second half. That's on BetEasy as well at $1.89. Like Jacob mentioned, Cowboys have been prone to give up or just being fatigued in the second half of games. And with these new rules, it is easier to blow a team out. Not as many best bets this round, and that's not necessarily because we're going to protect our record or anything. We're being super selective, but it just was a tough round. You have 5 out of the 8 games with nearly double-digit or higher favourites, which is very tricky sometimes, especially if you can't bring yourself to take the big underdog. But 14-2 last week, that's a really, really good round. Hopefully we can have another good round like that this week. Make sure you tune in to us on Sunday night after the Sunday games to recap round 10 and what is hopefully another winning round. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you Sunday.